This old 1904 family portrait looks happy until you notice what the youngest daughter is holding tight. Dr. Rebecca Foster had worked at the Detroit Historical Museum for 15 years, sorting thousands of photographs that showed the city's change from a small trading post into a busy industrial center. On a gray November morning in 2018, she opened a cardboard box given by the family of a woman named Clara Jenkins, who had died at the age of 103. Inside were many family photos, letters, and personal papers covering nearly 100 years of Detroit history. The photograph that caught Rebecca's eye was fixed on thick cardboard, with corners softened by time. The picture showed a family of 5, standing on the front porch of a wooden house. The sepia colors had turned to a warm brown, but the details stayed very clear. A photographer's mark on the back said Morrison Photography Studio, Gracia Avenue, Detroit, Michigan, October 1904. The family looked well off for that time. The father wore a dark suit with a clean white shirt, standing tall and proud. The mother sat in a wooden chair, her dress neatly set with a cameo pin at her neck. 3 children stood between them, 2 boys, around 12 and 10 years old, and a little girl no more than 6 years old. What made Rebecca stop was the girl's face. While the rest of the family held the usual stiff poses from early 20th century photos, the youngest child had a look of strong focus on her small face. Her eyes stared at something just past the camera, and her tiny hands pressed against her chest, gripping something partly hidden by the folds of her white dress. Rebecca brought her magnifying glass closer, looking hard at the girl's hands. Whatever she held was small, rectangular, and seemed made of paper or cardboard. The edge showed a bit of printed words that Rebecca could not read clearly. She added the photograph to the museum's, its digital records, and marked it for a detailed high-resolution scan. The Jenkins gift came with a short note saying these items belonged to Clara's great-aunt, a woman named Ruth, who had lived in Detroit all her life. There were no other details, no names for the people in the pictures, and no explanation of their meaning. Rebecca had learned over the years that the most important history finds often seem plain at first. A family portrait from 1904, looking normal and nice, might hold small clues that only show their true value after careful study. She had no idea that this one picture would lead her to discover one of the bravest and most risky acts of resistance in early 20th century Detroit, a secret kept in plain view for more than 100 years, held in a 6-year-old girl's hands. 2 weeks later, Rebecca got word that the high-resolution scan was ready. The museum had bought new scanning tools that could catch fine details, letting researchers study photos at sizes not possible with old methods. She sat at her computer with a cup of coffee, thinking it would be a normal cataloging task. She started zooming in on different parts of the image one by one. The house behind the family looked well kept, with fresh paint on the porch rails, clean windows, and a small garden at the side of the frame. The father's suit was simple, but well made and neat. The mother's dress had fine hand sewing, with delicate patterns at the collar and sleeves. Then Rebecca zoomed in on the youngest girl's hands, and she caught her breath. At the highest zoom, the object held against the child's chest became clear. It was a train ticket, but not an ordinary one. The printed words could now be read: Detroit and Cleveland Navigation Company. Special passage, one way, good for bearer and family. But what made Rebecca's hands shake as she fixed the image contrast was the small, neat handwriting along the bottom edge of the ticket. Safe passage arranged, present to Conductor Wilson. Destroy after use. This was no simple travel paper. The wording, the handwritten notes, and the way the child held it, as if her life depended on it, all showed something much bigger than a regular family trip. Rebecca zoomed closer on the girl's face. The strong focus she had seen earlier now made full sense. This child was not just posing for a photo. She was protecting something valuable, something risky, something that needed to be recorded, but also kept safe. Her small fingers gripped the ticket so tight that Rebecca could see the strain in her knuckles, even after more than a century. The date on the ticket was partly visible, October 18, 1904, the same month as the photograph. Rebecca checked this against her knowledge of Detroit history. In 1904, the city was growing fast with industry, drawing workers from many places, but it was also a safe place for black families fleeing danger and unfair treatment in the South. Families who needed help, protection, and most of all, secrecy. Rebecca printed several bigger copies of the ticket section, studying every clear detail. The more she looked, the more sure she felt that this photograph showed something special. It gave proof of an underground network still working many years after the Civil War, still aiding families to reach freedom, still taking big risks to move people to safety. She needed to learn who this family was, where they came from, and what happened to the little girl trusted with such an important secret. Rebecca started her search at the Detroit Public Library's Burton Historical Collection, which held many records of the city's black community from the late 1800s and early 1900s. She began with city lists from 1904, matching addresses on Gracia Avenue near the Morrison studio. The big break came from an unexpected helper, a librarian named Michael Chen, who heard Rebecca talking about her search, brought her some church records from Second Baptist Church, one of Detroit's oldest black groups. If a black family lived in Detroit in 1904, Michael said, they were probably linked to Second Baptist. The church was important to the community, especially for families new from the South. Rebecca turned the pages of the membership book with care. In October 1904, a new family was listed, Thomas and Catherine Price, with their 3 children, William, James, and Ruth. The address was on Brush Street, just a few blocks from Gracia Avenue. The note said the family had just come from Birmingham, Alabama. Ruth was the same name from the donation note. Rebecca's heart beat faster. She checked the name against the museum's donation papers and found the match. Clara Jenkins had written that the photos belonged to her great-aunt Ruth Price, born in Birmingham in 1898 and lived in Detroit until her death in 1982 at age 84. Rebecca now had names and dates. Ruth Price, 6 years old in the photo, holding a ticket that promised safe travel for her family's move from Alabama to Michigan. But bigger questions stayed. Why did they need to flee? Who set up the passage? And why did they record it in a photo, taking the chance of being found out? She looked at old records of Birmingham in 1904. What she found was scary. The city was full of harsh racial unfairness. Black people faced daily threats, sudden arrest, and forced work deals that were like slavery in all but name. Lynchings happened often, and families who spoke up or tried to leave could face deadly results. A newspaper story from the Birmingham Age Herald, dated September 1904, got her attention. Negro carpenter arrested for breach of contract. Thomas Price, held for check on leaving work without permission. The article was short and cold, but the name sent a chill through Rebecca. Thomas Price, Ruth's father. Rebecca knew she had to go to Birmingham to learn the whole story. 3 weeks later, she reached the Birmingham Public Library archives, where a researcher named Dr. Marcus Williams had agreed to help her study the Price family's past in Alabama. Marcus had spent many years recording the lives of black families during the Jim Crow time, and he saw right away how important Rebecca's find was. The year 1904 was especially tough in Birmingham, he said, taking out boxes of papers and old newspapers. The prison labor system was at its highest. Black men were picked up on made-up charges and then rented to mining companies, steel plants, and railroad work groups. The death rate in those camps was very bad. Together, they put together Thomas Price's story. He had been a skilled carpenter, working for a white-owned building company. From labor papers Marcus had gathered, Thomas was promised $1 a day, but got only part of that, paid late and often in company notes instead of real money. When he asked for the pay he earned, he was arrested for breaking the work deal, a charge often used to trap black workers in endless debt and forced jobs. But Thomas never reached a labor camp. Court papers show his case was suddenly dropped after only 3 days in jail. No reason given, no fine paid, and Thomas Price just vanished from Birmingham's official lists after September 1904. He got away, Marcus said quietly, looking at the papers on the table. Someone helped him leave before he could be sent to the camps, and his family went too. Rebecca showed Marcus the clear image of the ticket Ruth had held. Marcus studied it closely, then took out a leather journal from one of his archive boxes. "I have been gathering stories, and proof of what folks called the new Underground Railroad, networks that helped black families leave the South after Reconstruction. Most people think that kind of organized help ended with the Civil War, but it did not. It just went more quiet, more risky, and less written down. The journal held stories gathered in the 1960s from older people who took part in, or were saved, by these networks. One note from a woman named Josephine Carter described the setup. They used railroad workers, church people, and trusted conductors. Families got special tickets with secret messages. You had to know which conductor to show it to, and you had to destroy the ticket after you got there safely. It was dangerous for all involved. If caught helping, you could be killed. Rebecca and Marcus looked at each other. The ticket in Ruth's hands was not just proof of a trip. It was evidence of a large, brave network that saved many lives while working in full secret. Back in Detroit, Rebecca reached out to experts on early 20th century railroad history. She wanted to know how the safe travel system worked and who helped run it. Her questions led her to Dr. Patricia Morrison at Wayne State University, whose studies looked at black railroad workers and their part in community resistance. Patricia's eyes grew wide when Rebecca showed her the zoomed image of Ruth's ticket. The Detroit and Cleveland Navigation Company, Patricia said, pointing at the words. That matters. They ran steamships and rail links between Detroit, Cleveland, and Buffalo. In 1904, they had many black porters, conductors, and dock workers, and some of those workers surely helped families leave the South. Patricia brought up papers from her own studies. Look here. A conductor named Abraham Wilson worked the Detroit line in 1904. I found mentions of him in several old stories. He was known in the community as someone you could trust, someone who helped people. She showed Rebecca a photo from 1906 of railroad workers in front of a steam train. Abraham Wilson stood in the middle, a tall man with a proud look and calm eyes. He worked for the railroad for 35 years, Patricia explained. After he stopped working, he stayed active in civil rights efforts. He died in 1941, but his grandson is still living in Ann Arbor. 2 days later, Rebecca sat in the living room of Marcus Wilson, Abraham's 83-year-old grandson. The walls held many family pictures, including several of Abraham in his conductor uniform. Marcus listened closely as Rebecca told what she had found. My grandfather did not talk much about the details, Marcus said slowly. But he told me once, when I was young, that the most important work he ever did was not on the regular schedule. He said there were families who needed help, who needed someone they could trust to get them safely from one place to another. He said he carried messages, helped set up trips, and sometimes gave tickets to families ready to leave everything behind. Marcus went to a cabinet and took out a small metal box. Inside were some of his grandfather's personal papers. Among them was a small notebook with yellowed and delicate pages. This was his private record, Marcus said, opening it with care. He kept it hidden his whole life. After he died, my grandmother gave it to my father, and my father gave it to me. I have never shown it to anyone outside the family. The notebook had names, dates, and notes, a secret record of families Abraham had helped between 1902 and 1920. On a page dated October 1904, Rebecca saw an entry that made her throat feel tight. Price family, Birmingham to Detroit. Mother, father, 3 children. Safe arrival confirmed. Ticket destroyed as instructed. Finding more about Ruth Price herself meant contacting her living family. Through Clara Jenkins' relatives, Rebecca found Ruth's niece, Eleanor Price Hamilton, who lived in Southfield, a suburb of Detroit. Eleanor, 78 years old, had clear memories of her Aunt Ruth, who had lived until Eleanor was in her 30s. Aunt Ruth was the most dignified woman I ever knew, Eleanor said, welcoming Rebecca into her home. She became a teacher, spent her whole career teaching black children in Detroit schools. She never married, never had children of her own, but she treated every student like family. She used to say that education was the one thing nobody could take from you, no matter how hard they tried. Eleanor brought out a wooden chest that had belonged to Ruth. Inside were teaching plans, report cards, letters from old students, and a small leather diary. Kept this diary from the time she was about 12 until she was in her 20s, Eleanor explained. I read some of it after she died. She wrote about the trip from Alabama, about what her family had left behind. With Eleanor's okay, Rebecca read through the diary's early pages with care. Ruth's writing started out young and shaky, but grew stronger over time. An entry from 1910, when Ruth was 12, described the 1904 escape. I remember being so scared on the train. Mama told me to hold the ticket close and not let anyone see it except the conductor, she wrote. She said it was our ticket to freedom, but also dangerous if the wrong person saw it. Papa took us to the photographer before we left the Detroit station, because he wanted proof that we had made it, that we were safe, that we were free. He told me to hold the ticket in the picture so that someday someone would know how we got here, and what it cost. Another entry from 1915 was even clearer. Papa told me tonight about Birmingham, and why we had to leave. He had asked for the wages he earned, and they arrested him for it. He said, in Alabama, asking for what you earned could get you killed, or sent to a place where you'd work until you died. A man from the church helped him get out of jail. A network of people helped us reach Detroit. People who risked their lives, so we could be free. Papa said we had a duty to remember, to record, to make sure the truth was not forgotten. Ruth had kept that duty. She had kept the photograph safe her whole life, saved her father's story, and passed it on through her family. The ticket she held in that 1904 portrait had been destroyed as instructed, but its picture stayed as proof of a journey, a network, and an act of courage that had saved a family. Rebecca's discovery of the Price family story opened new ways to understand a much bigger, historical event. She worked with Marcus Williams in Birmingham and Patricia Morrison in Detroit to map the full reach of the new Underground Railroad that worked in the early 20th century. Their studies showed a well-planned network across many states. Church groups in the North and South kept quiet contact. Railroad workers, both black and white, shared news about safe paths and trusted contacts. Families who got away often sent money back to help others make the trip. The system worked through secret words, trusted helpers, and careful papers meant to be destroyed after use, which made Ruth's photograph even more special. Patricia found records of at least 30 other families who reached Detroit between 1900 and 1910, under similar conditions, helped by the same network that aided the Prices. Each family had fled real dangers: arrests on false charges, forced work deals, racial attacks, or money tricks that were like slavery in practice, if not in name. Marcus found papers in Birmingham about the people who helped families leave. Many were members of black churches who used jobs as houseworkers, delivery men, or other roles that let them move around to carry messages and plan departures. Some were white Friends, Quakers, and other religious people who saw helping families escape as a moral duty. And some were railroad workers like Abraham Wilson, who used their jobs to move people to safety. The dangers were huge. In the South, anyone caught helping a black person leave a work deal or avoid arrest could face charges, attacks, or death. In the North, those who helped could be taken to court under laws that still called for sending back people fleeing legal duties, even though slavery was over. Yet the network kept going. Rebecca found proof that it worked until at least 1920, helping thousands of families move to northern cities where they could start new lives with more safety and chances. Detroit, with its growing car industry and strong black community, was a main goal. The photograph of Ruth Price, holding her ticket with such strong purpose, became a symbol of this hidden history, a clear record of courage, resistance, and community support that had stayed hidden in plain sight for over 100 years. Understanding the full meaning of what Thomas Price had risked needed Rebecca to look deeper into what happened in Birmingham in the days before the family's escape. She went back to Alabama and worked with Marcus Williams to build the timeline from court, papers, newspaper stories, and church records. Thomas had been arrested on September 15, 1904, charged with breaking his work contract for asking for unpaid wages from his boss. The usual path for such cases was fast and harsh: a quick hearing before a friendly judge, a fine the person could not pay, and quick transfer to a company that would rent the prisoner's work. Men sent to the labor camps rarely lived more than a few years, but Thomas never went to trial. Marcus found a note in the jail's record book. Prisoner T. Price released on recognizance September 18, 1904. Case dismissed. No explanation, no record of who helped or why the charges ended. Just a sudden, surprising release. A letter saved in Second Baptist Church's archives in Birmingham, written by a reverend named Joseph Garrett, gave the answer. Garrett had written to a friend in Detroit in October 1904. "We have helped another family to safety. Brother Thomas was taken from jail through ways I cannot write down. The danger to all involved was great. The family left within hours. I pray they have reached your city safely and found the help we set up." Thingy. The ways Garrett could not write about became clearer through old stories Marcus had gathered. In several accounts from the 1960s, older people described how the Birmingham network worked. Friendly jail guards who could be paid or convinced to look away, false papers that mixed up a prisoner's status, and planned efforts to move people out of the city before officials noticed. Thomas had been given perhaps 24 hours notice that his release was set and that he needed to leave Birmingham right away with his family. Everything they owned had to be left behind. Catherine had packed what they could carry: clothes, a few special photos, papers proving their marriage and their children's births. They had left their home, their community, everything known, with no sure promise they would reach safety. The train trip from Birmingham to Detroit took about 36 hours, with stops in Nashville and Cincinnati. For those hours, the family lived in constant fear of being stopped, questioned, or sent back. The ticket Ruth held was their protection, but also their biggest risk. If the wrong person saw it, if they showed it to the wrong conductor, the whole plan could fail. Thomas had recorded that moment of great worry in the photograph, showing his family safe in Moore, their new city, while his youngest daughter still held the proof of how they had arrived. By early 2019, Rebecca had put her research into a full exhibition for the Detroit Historical Museum called Hidden Passages, the New Underground Railroad in the Industrial Age. The main item was the Price family photograph, shown with the papers Rebecca, Marcus, and Patricia had collected. The exhibition got quick notice. Descendants of families who made similar trips contacted the museum, sharing their own stories and pictures. A pattern appeared. Many families had recorded their arrivals in the North with formal portraits, marking the time they reached safety and started new lives. Among the visitors was Eleanor Price Hamilton's daughter, Dr. Lisa Hamilton, who taught African American history at the University of Michigan. "My great-great-aunt Ruth's photograph has given voice to thousands of people whose stories were never written," Lisa said at the exhibition's opening. These families were not running from slavery. They were running from the systems that took its place, the laws and ways designed to keep black people in chains by different names. This photograph is evidence of their courage and of the networks that made survival possible. The photograph also started new studies. Historians began carefully checking photos from the early 1900s, looking for other cases of families recording their escapes or keeping proof of the help they got. Several more examples came up, each adding more detail to the knowledge of how the network worked. Patricia Morrison grew her research on railroad workers' part in the network, finding at least 15 conductors and porters who had helped families travel safely between 1900 and 1925. Their descendants formed a group to save and share these stories, making sure their ancestors' bravery would be honored. Marcus Williams worked with communities in Birmingham to record the people who had helped families escape, creating a memorial to their courage. The memorial included the names of many people, church members, workers, and regular citizens who had risked everything to help others reach freedom. Ruth Price's diary, with her careful notes of her family's trip and her father's reasons for leaving, was published in an explained edition. Her words gave a child's view of the fear and hope of escape, making the history feel close and real for today's readers. The photograph's effect went beyond school and books. It appeared in a PBS documentary about the Great Migration and its early steps, helping millions understand that the movement of black families from south to north was not just about money. It was often about staying alive, needing courage, planning, and the help of networks that worked in secret for many years. The exhibition at the Detroit Historical Museum stayed up for 18 months, and the Price family photograph went to museums in Birmingham, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. Each place added details about local networks that had helped families leave oppression and build new lives in the early 20th century. For Rebecca, the work had changed how she saw the way history evidence lasts and what it can show. A single photograph kept safe through 4 generations had opened a view into a hidden world of resistance, courage, and community strength. In June 2020, the Detroit Historical Society set up a permanent gallery to the stories of families who had come to the city looking for safety and chances between 1900 and 1930. The Price family photograph held the main spot. Ruth's strong young face and tightly held ticket served as a reminder of what it took to reach freedom. Eleanor Price Hamilton, 91 years old, came to the dedication ceremony. "My Aunt Ruth used to tell me that her father made her promise something when she was young," Eleanor said, her voice steady even at her age. "He made her promise that if she ever had the chance to tell the truth about what happened, about what they escaped, and who helped them, she should tell it. She kept that promise through her teaching, through saving the photograph, through passing the story down. Now, the truth she promised to tell is here for everyone to see." The gallery had interactive parts, letting visitors follow the paths families had taken, read stories from people who made the trip, and understand the network of helpers who had made escape possible. School groups from across Detroit came often, learning about this hidden part of their city's history. Rebecca kept a copy of the Ruth Price photograph in her office. The little girl's determined look remained a constant reminder of why history work matters. Every item sorted, every photograph studied, might hold another hidden truth waiting to be found and shared. Ruth Price had been 6 years old when she stood before the camera, holding a ticket that stood for her family's rescue and recording a moment of great courage. She had lived another 76 years, teaching hundreds of students, keeping her family's story, and honoring her father's call that the truth must be remembered. The ticket itself had been destroyed in 1904, as Abraham Wilson's instructions required, but its image remained, pressed between a child's small hands, proof that even in the hardest times, networks of courage and care worked in secret to help people reach safety. That truth, hidden for over a century in a family portrait, would now be remembered and honored for generations to come.